Welcome. My name is Brian Nelson. This is the 10th and final lesson in the Introduction to Programming with C# course. In this lesson, we're going to put together the things we have learned into a small project. Let's get started. The project we are going to build is a console application that will ask the user for 24 temperature values and calculate the average, minimum, and maximum temperature over the period of a day. The project will allow us to work on console input and output, arrays of doubles, classes, for loops, and string interpolation. Let's jump into Visual Studio and get started. In lesson 10, we're going to create a project. It's going to utilize all the different elements that we've learned so far, or as many as we can get into one basic project. What we're going to do is we're going to collect 24 temperature values for the day. So we're going to expand on this theme. We're going to then find the minimum temperature, the maximum temperature, and then calculate the average temperature for the day. And then finally output the values that we've entered. We'll be able to really dig into all the different elements that we've learned and put them together into one concept. We're going to create a new project for lesson 10. We're going to start with a console app. Next, lesson 10, and we're going to add a library to this as well, so we can put everything we've kind of done together into one big project. I'm going to get rid of that, and then I'm going to add a new project. We're going to pick the class library, .NET Standard, lesson 10 library, and I'm going to delete that. Now I'm going to add a project reference to the console app, and it's going to reference the library. Then I'm going to create a new folder for objects, and I'm going to create a new folder for helpers. Now what I want to do, I'm going to put this over on the left, and then I'm going to bring up lesson 7. What I want to do is I'm going to steal some of our code from lesson 7. I'm going to add a class, and I'm going to make temperature helper. I'm going to make the class public. And then over in temperature helper, I'm going to just go ahead. I don't need the constructor. That was just for that lesson's example. And I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that and then maximize here. Let's go ahead and define class temperature. It's going to be public, and it's going to have public int hour of day, and then public double temperature. We need to add a using lesson 10 library dot objects. So now the temperature helper can reference that. Because I created this here, I hadn't set this to static. Now our temperature helper is defined and brought in. We have our temperature reading, which just has hour, day, and temperature. Now we're going to create a day object. Add new class day, and we'll make it public. Public day, we're going to create our constructor. In this class, we're going to have a private temperature reading, and we're going to create an array for our readings. And we're going to create 24 elements. So if we want to get the readings, we're going to create a method called public double get reading in Celsius int hour of day, temperature reading equals. If reading is equal to null, for now we're going to just return 0. Otherwise, we're going to return reading.temperature. And then let's write another function called public double get reading in Fahrenheit. We're going to do the same thing here. Temperature reading equals. Here we're both referencing a class level variable there. We also have a method level variable of the same name because they both only exist in their scope. So that's an example of that. And if reading equals null, return 0. Return temperature help. Oh, we haven't referenced it, so we need to do a using to our helper library.helpers. So now we can say temperature helper dot to Fahrenheit, and we're going to say our reading dot temperature. We also have that extension method that we could have used, so let's just do that. So we can just say reading dot to Fahrenheit, so we can use that extension method and make it much more concise. Either way, we needed to import the lesson 10 library helpers namespace. Let's do public double set reading, and then we're going to say int hour of day, comma, double temperature in Celsius. We're going to define a temperature reading equal new temperature reading. And then we're going to say reading dot hour of day equals hour of day. Reading dot temperature equal temperature in Celsius. And now we're going to set it into our array so that we can store it, hour of day. It's equal to reading. And this is not going to return anything. We're going to make it a void, so just into a method. And then we're going to create public void set reading from Fahrenheit int hour and double temperature in Fahrenheit. We're going to call this method set reading from Fahrenheit is going to call the set reading method. To do that, we are just going to say set reading, and we're going to say the hour of day, and then we're going to do our temperature helper and to Celsius on our temperature in Fahrenheit. We calculate the Celsius from the Fahrenheit, then we pass it into this method and it does all the hard work. So we've reused this one set of code so that we don't have to duplicate it down here. So now we have a day object that keeps track of all 24 hours of the day and the temperatures and such for that. Well, first of all, console.writeLine daily temperature calculator. So we're going to write that out, and then we're going to do a for loop, and then the length will be 24. So we'll go from hour 0 to hour 23. Now we're going to write console.writeLine, enter, and we're going to use our string interpolation here, enter the temperature for hour and I. Let's go ahead and run this, and we're going to put a breakpoint at the end. This won't read any values in. We go back over here. We see our daily temperature calculator with our 24 hours, 0 to 23, that we're going to ask for values. For our testing purposes, I'm going to just do this as 2 for now. We'll come back and we'll add that. Let's create our day object, and before we can use that, we need to say using lesson library dot objects. We're going to create a day object equals new day, string input value equals console.read line. And so if we had not changed this from 24, we would have to enter all 24 values. Now we want to convert that. We've used the one method for conversion, so let's start with that. Double temperature in, we're going to enter the temperature for hour in Fahrenheit equal convert dot to double input value. All right, so let's test this and see how this works. So we hit F5, enter the temperature for hour 0. So let's say it's 70. Enter the temperature for hour 1. Let's say it's 71. Okay, so we just did 2 in our loop so that we entered the 2 temperatures. Now, if you notice, okay, this is out of scope, so we didn't do anything with those temperatures, but we're able to read them in from the console. All right, if we want to now say day dot set reading from Fahrenheit, our hour of day is our counter I, and then the temperature in Fahrenheit is the value, okay? And that's defined outside of the loop, so down here, we should be able to say console.writeLine day.get reading in Fahrenheit for just hour 0. Okay, so we'll see how that works. So if we go F5, hour 0, 70, hour 1, 71, we see how it printed out the 70, which is the first hour I entered. So that's all working. Let's do some more work. What we want to do is, now that we've got the temperatures collecting, and we're not going to collect them all yet, but we're going to go calculate from the day. Let's create a function called public double find max temperature. And we'll do this find max temperature in Celsius. And then we'll create another double find max temperature in Fahrenheit. We will return temperature helper dot to Fahrenheit, because we store the values in Celsius. And so we're going to return the values from this function. So we'll find the max. So we just have to find the max one time. So now we just need to define what this int max, and I'm going to say max temp equals, double. So when we find the max, the easiest thing to do is say double dot min value. So we set it to the minimum possible value. And then we're going to do our for loop, because we know there's from 0 to 24. Temperature reading, tr, or let's just call it reading, equals readings, I. So we're going to go through each of them. And now we're going to say if reading is not equal to null, to make sure it's not equal to null. And then we're going to say if reading dot temperature, this function finds the max Celsius. So if the current temperature is greater than our initial min value, oops, and this shouldn't have parentheses here. If the temperature reading that we just pulled out of the array is greater than the max temp, then it is our new max temp. Then we are going to return our max temp. So now everything's happy because we're returning a value. So to repeat, we set it to the minimum possible value. Then if we find a value that is greater than that, we set that to the max, and eventually we return the max. Now, if it doesn't find any values greater, it will return the min value. So let's do the same kind of thing for the minimum value. Public double find min temperature in Celsius. And then we're also going to have the same public double find min temperature in Fahrenheit. And again, we can just copy this. We're going to change from max to min. So now we just have to define the min. Double min value equals double. And now we're going to set it to the max. Where before we set it to the min, we're trying to find the min, so we set it to the max, or we're trying to find the max, so we set it to the min. All right, so we can just copy from up here. Now we get our temperature reading. If the reading's not equal to null and the current temperature is less than the min temperature, then the min value is equal to that. At the end, we return the min value. So now we can find the max, the min temperatures. All right, so let's do some testing of this before we move on. Comment that out. Double min temp, and we want the values in Fahrenheit. Day.find min temp in Fahrenheit. And then double max temp equals day.find max temp in Fahrenheit. I'm going to do 4 values so it's a little more obvious. And let's go ahead and run this as is. So hour 0, I'm going to stick with 70. Then I'm going to do 75. Then I'm going to do 80 and 85, just as our examples. Our minimum temperature is 70 and our maximum temperature is 85. So that works just like we planned. And they're returning in Fahrenheit. Let's do something a little more advanced. Let's go back into this class. And now public double calculate average temperature in Fahrenheit. Public double calculate average temperature in Celsius. Okay, and I'm going to move this up. I'm going to cut that and then paste it, because what we've done before is we've called the one from the other, just to keep them in the same order as we've defined in the first. So we're going to call this, we need 2 values here. We have int hours, and that's going to equal to 0 to begin with, and int sum, and that's going to equal to 0. Oh, sorry, the sum should be a double. Okay, and now we're going to go through our readings, and 24 of them, and we're going to get our reading, and we're going to check to make sure it's not null, just to be safe. And then hours, every time we find a reading that's not null, we're going to add 1 to the hours, so we're only going to average the hours that we've entered. And then the sum, we'll do plus equals our reading dot temperature. So plus equals, again, it's the same as sum equals sum plus reading dot temperature. So those are the same. I'll leave it as the shorter syntax. Double average equals sum divided by hours. Then we're going to return our average. Okay, and we return it in Celsius. So we do all our calculations in Celsius, we return them, and then the Fahrenheit function takes the Celsius average and returns the Fahrenheit value. What we can say is double average temp equals day dot calculate average temp, and we want this Fahrenheit value. So let's go ahead and run this again. And again, we're only doing 4 values. I'm going to do 2 at 70 and 2 at 80. And that way we should get a value of 75. So our average temp is equal to 75 as we expect. And our max is 80 and our min is 70. So that works perfectly. If we just set this to 24, we basically have the program ready to go. It'll now calculate the min, the max, and the average temperatures for the period of a day. Before we think we're done, let's use all of the functions. So I'm going to do console.writeLine. I'm going to put a space in, and then I'm going to console.writeLine, say C, LCS, or F. We'll ask that as a question, and we will now say console dot read. So we're going to say string input value, and I'm going to get rid of this because we can't declare that twice. If input value, so we're going to expect a C or an F, and so we're going to say if the input value, and we can say dot equals C. One thing we can do is string comparison dot, we are going to do that. So we're ignoring our case. Bool working in Celsius. So this is going to be false. If it starts with C, then we're going to say working in Celsius equal true. If working in Celsius, basically here we're saying if it's C, we're working in Celsius. Otherwise, we're working in Fahrenheit. So if we're working in Celsius, we're going to do that. Else. And now we're going to move that, and we're going to paste that. Enter the temperature for the hour in Celsius. Otherwise, we're saying Fahrenheit. We say read the input value. Now we're going to just say temperature reading, and we get that value. Now we say if working in Celsius, else. I'm going to cut that. So we're going to say dot set reading. We'll go back through this in just a sec. And then temperature reading. There we go. If we're working in Celsius, we write out for Celsius. If we're working in Fahrenheit, we write that out. Then we read an input value as a string, which is defined up above. Then we convert that to a temperature reading. And based on if we're working in Celsius, we either set the Celsius value or we set the reading from Fahrenheit. We're going to now say, I'm going to comment these out, and we're going to do this a little different now. So we're going to say double min temp. We're going to say double max temp. We're going to say double average temp. Here, let's do this. String reading type. We're going to default to Fahrenheit. Make that as a string. And down here, we can say reading type equal Celsius. Rather than this if statement, which would work, we can also do this now. Because what we can say is with our interpolation, we can add the reading type. If we do have a C entered, we switch over to Celsius. Now we can kind of combine those. We read the value, and we get our temperature reading back. So now we define our variables, and then we say if working in Celsius, else. Okay, now let's bring this down. There we go. So now our min temp, and we've defined those outside of this block of code, because if we define them in the block of code, they'll only exist in this portion of the if statement. But we want to use them down here. So we want to write output to console. So the min temp is day.find, and our max temp is day.find max temperature in Celsius. And then we're going to say our average temp is day calculate average temperature in Celsius. If we now copy this, we just need to switch over to Fahrenheit functions. So now we're going to write our output, console.writeLine minimum temperature. We're going to use string interpolation, so we need that $sign in there. We're going to say min temp, and we'll say in And we're going to say reading type. And let's copy that. And we'll do that. And so our maximum temperature, and now it's going to be max temp. Same reading type. And then our average temperature, temp. I think that will work. Let's only do the 4 because we're still testing. Let's go ahead and run this. Let's do Fahrenheit. 70, 71, 72, and 73. Let's look at our output. So our minimum is 70, our maximum is 73, and our average temperature is 71.5. Let's run this again with Celsius. So let's say 20, 21, 22, 23, and let's look at our output. All right, so our minimum temperature is 20, our maximum temperature is 23, and our average temperature is 21.5. So those both appear to work. Let's do some input validation. We've checked this value and we've ignored case, so this should let us do, if we rerun, it should let us do a lowercase c, and it did. So that worked. What happens if we do Celsius? It goes back to Fahrenheit because it was expecting a single value. So how can we work around that? What we can do is if input value.length, okay, so that's a property of the input value string. So if the input value is greater than 1, we're going to say the input value equals the input value.substring. We're going to start at 0, and we're only going to get 1 character. Let's put a breakpoint in here. So what we're trying to do is we're going to strip off the first character of the input value, and then we will do our comparison on that. So let's go ahead and hit F5. So it's going to ask us, and we're going to type our Celsius. The length is 7. Okay, so we've taken the first character, and now we're going to just compare that first character. So what we've done is we can now enter either the full word or just the first character. You're trying to make this program as easy to use as possible. And so some of this validation can add logic to our program. Our program's getting bigger, but we're able to validate. So if we go ahead and run and we pick Celsius, fine, continue. So enter the temperature for hour 0. What if we do something like, what happens? Well, it can't convert the value from 20 to a double. We should only allow them to enter it correctly. Another way to do a conversion is if double.tryParse. So we're going to try to parse, and parsing is just another way of converting from a string to a value. We're going to try to parse our input value into an out double. This is an output parameter, and we're going to say double value. If we can parse it, we are now going to set it to that double value. You notice the temperature reading is no longer visible because the temperature reading is defined in that. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to paste it in there. If we're able to parse it, we get our temperature reading now from the parsing. Otherwise, we are going to say console.writeLine invalid value entered. I'll show you what happens. This isn't going to quite work like I think we want. So we're going to hit F5. And we're going to do it in Celsius. So we're going to say 20. Invalid value entered. Great. So we weren't able to break the program this time, but we've moved on to hour 1 and we didn't get the hour for 0. Well, that's not what we want. What we need to do, we're going to define a while loop in here. Bool done equal false. While not done. And the exclamation point is the not operator. I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to paste it up above. While we're not done, we start off with a value of done equal false. So the only time we're done is if we make it into this parsing, and then we say done equal true. Now, I can show you what will happen. We hit F5. We're going to do Celsius, and we're going to do our bad value. invalid value entered. Enter temperature for hour 0. Okay, so 70. So 70 is not a good value in Celsius. You can do more for that. I don't think we're going to do that here in this project. We're already getting long enough. You can see now in our output, as soon as we had a good value, it moved on to the other hours. So that's a way, by doing a while loop, we can continue to ask for the same value until we get a good reading, and then we set the done equal to true, we exit out. And let's go ahead and put a breakpoint in there, and I'm gonna put it after here, hit F5, and we can step through and watch. So we'll do it in Celsius, 20. So we're gonna do a bad value. Our input value is 20, we're gonna try to parse that. The parsing failed. We loop back around, and we ask for the same value again. We're stuck in the while loop. We're not exiting it until we get a good value. And we read again. So now we can say 20. We've got a good value that we can parse. We're working in Celsius. So we set Celsius value. We say we're done. Okay, we're done. So we exit that first loop. And now we move on in the next step. So now I is 1. So we started with 0. Now we're at hour 1. And then we asked about hour 1. And you can see if we go, I'm going to get rid of this breakpoint, but say now we do 20 here, a bad value. It still keeps us on hour 1. So now we do 21, 22, 23, and the program will output, and we can go back and see our min, max, and average temperature. We haven't used a string builder. Let's go to the program. Let's do one string builder, and that'll wrap up pretty much everything we'd set out to do. And we need to do using system.text, and then we can define a string builder. SB equals new string builder. And then we're going to do a for loop. And we're going to go from 0 to 24 or less than. And we're going to say double value if working in Celsius, else value equals day dot get reading in Celsius. And I is the hour of the day. And let's copy that down. Get reading in Fahrenheit. I. We're going to go sb.append line, and we're going to use a string interpolation. So we can say hour I, and then we're going to say value in reading type. In the loop, we're going to go from 0 to 23, and we're going to append those temperatures. Then we're going to go console.writeLine. So basically what we're doing here is we're writing up all the data we entered. sb.toString. Now keep in mind, we're only running the first 4 hours still. So Celsius, 20, 21, 22, 23. And if we look, okay, so it defaults to 0. So we only got the values for the first 4 hours. Everything else defaulted to 0. So let's go ahead and now run kind of the complete app. Let's put it back to 24. And I'm going to just do Celsius and simple values again. Celsius. So let's start with 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 32, 33, 34, 35, 6, 37, 38. So that should be it. You can see we've got our minimum temperature of 15. The maximum temperature is the last 38. Our average temperature is 26.5. And then we use the string builder to output all of that to the console. All of the topics that we've gone over in these first lessons, we've made a real program. It's non-trivial, meaning we've got multiple classes defined. We've got static helpers. We take input from the user. We write input out to the user. We have some basic validation in place. We've basically utilized all the different elements of the first 9 lessons. This wraps up the lesson and the Introduction to Programming with C# course. The next course will be called A Little More Advanced Programming with C#. This course will expand on the introductory concepts we have investigated here. It will introduce file input and output, additional data types, class inheritance, as well as many other topics. Thank you for watching this course. I hope that you have found it useful. Continue to practice your skills by creating programs of your own design. Please subscribe to the channel so that you are notified when the next course is available. Thank you.